The afternoon sky over Pittsburgh hung low and gray, the air thick with the chill of late autumn. Wind brushed through the empty street, carrying the scent of wet concrete and fallen leaves. The sidewalk outside a worn-down stone building bore witness to a scene most people passed without a second glance. But for Maverick Steele, it was like stepping into a moment he'd buried long ago. He crouched beside the curb, covering his face with his weathered hands. His silver hair was unkempt, and his denim jacket had long lost its color. At 67, Maverick didn't just look tired, he looked like a man who had lost everything worth fighting for. His chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath a quiet battle. Next to him, barefoot and unmoving, sat a little girl with hair like sunlight and eyes wide with stillness. Her name was Phoenix Creed, and though she was barely 4 years old, there was something about her that felt ancient, a quiet resilience born not of years, but of circumstance. Clutched tightly in her small hands was a framed family photo, its golden trim dulled by fingerprints. A woman with red hair smiled beside a man in a dark suit. Between them, a child, Phoenix herself, grinned, frozen in time. Lying protectively by her side was a German shepherd named Draco. His body still, ears alert. He was thin, worn, but noble, a creature of loyalty and instinct, and right now, hunger. Phoenix looked at Maverick and spoke softly, her voice gentle but steady. "Buy my painting. It's so I can feed my dog." The words hit him like a blow to the chest. Simple, unrehearsed, honest in a way that adults had forgotten how to be. Maverick lowered his hands, blinking away tears. His gaze landed on the drawing she held out. A child's depiction of a yellow house, a stick figure girl, and a big brown dog. A red heart floated above them, drawn with shaky determination. He cleared his throat, voice cracked. "Where's your mom, kid?" Phoenix looked down. "She said she'd be right back. But she's been gone a long time." Maverick felt something twist inside him. He reached into his wallet, pulled out his last $20 bill, and handed it to her without thinking. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Now Draco can eat tonight." As Draco lifted his head, just for a moment, Maverick knew. This wasn't a chance encounter. This was the beginning of something he couldn't walk away from. The next morning, Maverick Steele stood by the window of his small apartment, coffee in hand, staring out at the cracked sidewalk where he'd met Phoenix the day before. He hadn't slept much. The girl's voice echoed in his head like a ghost. "Buy my painting. It's so I can feed my dog." Those words had peeled back something in him, something he thought he'd buried decades ago. He'd seen so much pain in his life, but nothing prepared him for the quiet strength of a child trying to survive. The truth was, he hadn't planned on going back. He'd told himself the moment had passed, that he'd done his part by giving her the money. But guilt is a persistent thing, especially when it's familiar. That little girl's eyes, they reminded him of someone from long ago. By noon, Maverick found himself walking the same path, hands in his pockets, heart pounding like he was heading into a past he never wanted to revisit. When he turned the corner, she was still there. Phoenix sat cross-legged on a flattened cardboard box, coloring something on a fresh sheet of paper. Draco was curled up beside her, breathing slow and shallow. The sight of them hit Maverick in the chest like a brick. No jacket, no food, no adult in sight, just a child and her dog, abandoned in plain view. She looked up when she saw him and offered a small smile, the kind that barely reaches the eyes. He sat down beside her without saying a word. She passed him the paper. It was another drawing, this one of a man with silver hair standing next to her and Draco. The figure was smiling. So was she. "That's you," she said simply. Maverick didn't know what to say. He studied the lines, the shaky effort, the tiny signature in the corner that read, "Phoenix." A lump formed in his throat. "Where do you sleep at night?" he finally asked. Phoenix looked across the street and pointed to the narrow alley behind a bakery. "It's warm there when the ovens are on." Her voice didn't break. It was as if she had accepted this life without complaint, without fear, as if she'd already learned what too many adults never do. Hope can survive even in the cracks. Maverick looked away, jaw clenched. He didn't have much, but he had a spare room, and a conscience that wouldn't let him leave her there again. Not after this. Not ever again. Maverick didn't remember the walk home, only the weight of Phoenix's tiny hand wrapped around his fingers. She didn't say much, and he didn't push her. Draco followed closely behind, limping slightly, his paws calloused from long nights on unforgiving pavement. Maverick's apartment was old and modest, but clean and quiet. It had once held laughter, the scent of Sunday breakfast, and the hum of piano music, things that had disappeared long ago. As he turned the key and opened the door, he hesitated. It had been years since anyone else had crossed that threshold. Phoenix stepped inside cautiously, eyes wide as she scanned the space. A faded floral couch sat beneath a window that faced the street. A shelf lined with dusty books stood next to a fireplace that hadn't been used in years. She didn't ask questions. She simply walked in, placed her drawing on the coffee table, and sat cross-legged on the rug with Draco curled beside her. It was as if she had been there before, or perhaps had simply imagined places like this when she dreamed. "I'll make something warm," Maverick muttered, already moving toward the kitchen. His hands moved on instinct, heating a can of soup, slicing bread, pouring water. But his mind was somewhere else. He couldn't shake the image of Phoenix pointing to that alley. Couldn't ignore how naturally she spoke of sleeping near ovens for warmth. The world had been cruel to this girl, and he didn't know why. But he knew one thing. She wouldn't face it alone anymore. When he returned, she was still there, humming softly as she stroked Draco's ears. She looked up when he handed her the bowl, smiled, and whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Maverick." He sat across from her, leaning against the couch, watching her eat slowly, politely, as if afraid to finish too quickly. Draco rested his head on her lap, his eyes half closed in something close to peace. "Phoenix," he said gently, "do you remember where you lived before?" She nodded but didn't speak. Her eyes dropped to the floor. After a long pause, she whispered, "There was a yellow house, and my mom had a garden. But then, she left." The silence that followed was heavy. Maverick knew better than to press. He had questions, 100 of them, but now wasn't the time. She was here. She was safe. That had to be enough for now. Still, as she leaned against Draco and slowly began to drift to sleep, Maverick felt something stir inside him. Not just concern. Not just guilt. Something deeper. Like the door he'd closed long ago was slowly beginning to open again. The next morning, Maverick woke to an unfamiliar sound. Quiet breathing that wasn't his. He sat up slowly on the couch, the blanket he had tossed over himself slipping to the floor. Across the room, Phoenix lay curled up on a makeshift bed of folded blankets, her arm draped protectively over Draco. The dog had barely moved during the night, but now his ears perked as Maverick stood, as if sensing every shift in the air. It had been years since Maverick had shared his space with another living soul. Now the silence felt different. Not empty, but full. He walked to the kitchen, made coffee, and stared at the calendar hanging crooked on the wall. November. Thanksgiving was just over a week away, but for Maverick, the holidays had long since lost their meaning. As he sipped from his chipped mug, he heard soft footsteps. Phoenix stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Her hair was messy, and her pink dress wrinkled, but she looked at him with a kind of trust that scared him more than anything else. "I dreamed of the garden," she said quietly, as she sat at the table. "My mom used to grow tomatoes and lavender. It smelled like summer." Her voice trailed off, but her gaze stayed distant, as if reaching back to a memory she was afraid might disappear if she looked away. Maverick didn't know how to respond. What do you say to a child who's clinging to fragments? He set down his coffee and leaned on the counter. "Do you remember your mom's name?" he asked gently. Phoenix thought for a moment, then nodded. "Rebecca. Rebecca Creed." She spoke it like a secret she hadn't shared with anyone in a long time. Maverick felt a chill run down his spine. The name stirred something, a faint memory, maybe even something he'd read or heard once, but couldn't place. He grabbed a notepad from the drawer, wrote it down, and circled it slowly. "That's helpful," he said. "Maybe we can find her." Phoenix didn't say anything, but the hope that flickered in her eyes was impossible to ignore. Draco, sensing her mood shift, laid his head on her feet and let out a soft sigh. As the day stretched on, Maverick found himself watching Phoenix more than he meant to. Her small movements, the way she lined up her drawings in a row, how she murmured to Draco like they shared a language no one else could hear. He didn't know what had happened to her mother or why Phoenix was truly alone, but deep down, he knew this was only the beginning of what they were about to uncover. Later that evening, Maverick sat hunched over his old laptop, the screen casting a pale glow across his face. His fingers moved slowly across the keyboard, every click echoing through the quiet apartment. Rebecca Creed, he typed into the search bar. It had been years since he looked up anything besides news headlines or the weather, but tonight, he felt the weight of responsibility heavy on his chest. Phoenix was asleep again, curled up with Draco by the space heater, trusting him with a peace he didn't think he deserved. The search results were scattered. Mentions of a missing woman in a local bulletin, a closed police report from nearly 3 years ago, and a faded article from a small-town newspaper outside Erie. Maverick clicked on the link. His heart tightened as a grainy photo loaded. A woman with red hair, holding a baby girl. The caption read, "Local woman Rebecca Creed vanishes. Infant daughter unaccounted for." The date on the article was nearly 4 years ago. Phoenix hadn't just been abandoned. She had been missing, and no one had found her. He sat back in his chair, the old wood creaking beneath him. It didn't make sense. Why would Rebecca leave Phoenix? Where had she gone? And why did the world stop looking? Maverick's mind reeled. The girl was here, alive, and no one seemed to know. He looked over at her sleeping form, her small chest rising and falling slowly. Draco raised his head, staring at Maverick with those alert, amber eyes, like he was waiting for the next move. The phone sat on the edge of the table, untouched. He knew he should call someone, the police, child services, anyone. But something held him back. It wasn't just fear. It was instinct. Deep in his gut, he felt that if he let Phoenix go now, she'd disappear into the system and be lost all over again. And this time, there might not be a second chance. Maverick had seen what happened to kids like her. He'd watched systems fail them over and over. He wasn't ready to let that happen again. Not this one. The knock at the door came just after midnight. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Maverick froze. No one visited him. Not this late. Not ever. He stood, heart racing, moving toward the door quietly. Through the peephole, he saw a figure in a black coat, standing still under the flickering hallway light. The man didn't look threatening, but he didn't look safe either. And when Maverick opened the door, the man simply said, "I'm looking for Rebecca Creed's daughter." Maverick didn't respond right away. He stood in the doorway, blocking the man's view of the apartment. Behind him, the dim glow of a lamp barely illuminated Phoenix and Draco, both still asleep. The man at the door had a hard expression, sharp jawline, piercing eyes, and a voice too calm for a question so heavy. He didn't look like law enforcement. He didn't introduce himself. But the way he said Rebecca Creed's daughter, like it was a fact, not a theory, made Maverick's blood run cold. "How do you know that name?" Maverick asked, his voice low, steady. The man didn't flinch. "You're not the only one who's been looking," he replied. "You're just the only one who found her." His eyes shifted for a second toward the inside of the apartment, and Maverick instinctively stepped forward, closing the door just enough to block the view. "You need to leave," he said firmly. "Whoever you are, this isn't your business." The man nodded once, then slipped a card into Maverick's hand. It was black, no logo, just a name printed in silver letters. Zane Crossfire, and a phone number with no area code. "When you're ready," he said, turning away. "There's more going on than you think." And just like that, he walked down the hallway and vanished into the night. Maverick stood frozen for a long moment, the door half closed, card in hand, pulse thudding in his ears. Back inside, Phoenix stirred. Her eyes opened slowly as Maverick sat on the edge of the couch, card still clenched in his fingers. "Was someone here?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. He nodded. "Just someone asking questions." She looked at him for a long second, studying him, maybe trying to decide whether he was telling the truth. Then she laid her head back down and whispered, "My mom said people would come. Bad people." The words hit him harder than he expected. He sat there in silence, staring at the black card. Something wasn't right. Why now? Why had no one come looking for her for years? And suddenly, after just one day off the streets, someone shows up at his door. Maverick had trusted his instincts his whole life, and right now, they screamed that this man, Zane Crossfire, wasn't just a stranger with a question. He was part of something much deeper, maybe even dangerous. Maverick slipped the card into a drawer and locked it. For now, he needed time. Time to protect Phoenix. Time to figure out what Zane knew. And maybe most importantly, time to prepare for the truth he hadn't been ready to face. The following morning, Maverick woke before the sun. He sat at the kitchen table in silence, the black card resting on the wood before him like a threat that hadn't yet spoken. He hadn't told Phoenix about the name Zane Crossfire, but her words from the night before kept echoing in his head. "My mom said people would come. Bad people." There was a reason Rebecca Creed disappeared. And maybe, just maybe, Maverick already knew more than he was willing to admit, even to himself. Phoenix wandered into the kitchen still half asleep, clutching Draco's leash even though the dog stayed close to her side without command. Maverick poured her a glass of orange juice, unsure of what else to offer. "Do you remember anyone named Crossfire?" he asked gently. Phoenix frowned. "Mom said, if anyone with that name came near me, I had to run." Maverick's jaw tightened. He reached for the card and slipped it into his jacket pocket without another word. By midday, Maverick found himself driving. He didn't tell Phoenix where they were going, only that it was safe. The town library stood like a relic from another time. Tall wooden doors, stone walls, and shelves that seemed older than memory. Inside, he logged into one of the public terminals and typed, "Zane Crossfire." What came up wasn't a personal profile. It was worse: sealed court records, whistleblower connections, and fragments of government-related surveillance cases linked to underground child protection operations. But one name kept reappearing in the documents: Rebecca Creed. Maverick leaned back, heart racing. Rebecca hadn't simply run away. She had been hiding from something bigger than he could have imagined. And somehow, Phoenix was at the center of it. As he stared at the screen, a shadow passed behind him. He turned quickly. A man in a dark beanie and coat stood watching him from across the room, pretending to scan books. Maverick didn't hesitate. He logged off, grabbed Phoenix by the hand, and walked quickly toward the exit. Once back in the car, Phoenix was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, "My mom said someone named Holloway used to help her." Blaze Holloway. Maverick blinked. Another name. Another crack in the wall of secrets. "Do you know where he is?" he asked. Phoenix shook her head. She just said he was the only one she trusted. That night, Maverick couldn't sleep. With every new name, every half-memory Phoenix shared, the puzzle began to take shape. But one truth became painfully clear. He wasn't just protecting a little girl anymore. He was standing in the middle of a story that someone didn't want told. The air was sharp the next morning, a cold wind scraping down the alleyways as Maverick paced the sidewalk outside a quiet diner just off 14th Street. He had barely touched his coffee. Inside his coat pocket were two things: Zane Crossfire's card and a slip of paper torn from a library printout, the last known address tied to Blaze Holloway. The name stirred something deep in him. He hadn't heard it in years. Back in the day, Blaze was known in underground circles as someone who protected people who couldn't go to the police. A man with shadows for allies. And if Rebecca had trusted him, then Maverick needed to find him. Phoenix sat at a booth inside the diner, eating a plate of scrambled eggs, her legs swinging off the bench. Draco lay beneath the table, eyes always alert, always watching. Maverick had told her only that they were meeting someone who used to know her mom. She hadn't said much in return. There was a tension in her that he hadn't seen before. A quiet stillness, like she was bracing for something she couldn't name. When Blaze finally walked in, Maverick almost didn't recognize him. His hair was darker now and streaked with gray. He walked with a slight limp, and his eyes, once sharp and calculating, looked tired. But the presence was still there. He scanned the room quickly before his gaze locked with Maverick's. A slow nod. No handshake. No smiles. Just history between them. "You shouldn't have come looking," Blaze said as he sat down. His voice was rough, low, like gravel underfoot. Maverick leaned in. "Rebecca's daughter is alive, and someone already came to my door asking for her. A man named Crossfire." At the sound of the name, Blaze's jaw clenched. He looked toward the window, his expression unreadable. "They found her," he muttered. "Which means they're closing in." "Who's they?" Maverick demanded. But Blaze didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a worn folder from inside his coat and slid it across the table. Inside were photos, surveillance images of Rebecca, a list of aliases, and a document stamped classified in red. "Rebecca was working with a network," Blaze said. "Protecting children being targeted by something bigger than anyone thought. When she vanished, I thought she was dead." Phoenix stared at the folder but didn't speak. Her hand reached for Mavericks beneath the table. He squeezed it, grounding her, even as his own world tilted off center. Blaze looked at both of them and said quietly, "If Crossfire is involved again, then whatever took Rebecca is still watching. And now they know she's still alive, through her daughter." Maverick felt the weight settle over him. They weren't just running from shadows anymore. They were being hunted by them. The ride back to Maverick's apartment was silent. Blaze Holloway had stayed behind, saying he needed time to prepare for what was coming. But his warning echoed in Maverick's ears like a drumbeat. "They know she's alive, through her daughter." Phoenix sat in the back seat with Draco's head resting in her lap, one hand buried in his fur, the other clutching her drawing pad like it was armor. Maverick kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror, wondering how much a child could carry before it broke her spirit. Somehow, she hadn't broken yet. Back inside, Phoenix retreated to her corner of the living room while Maverick paced the kitchen. His thoughts raced. Why had Rebecca gotten involved in something so dangerous? Why had she vanished without a trace? Why had no one come for Phoenix until now? He pulled out the folder Blaze had given him and opened it again, scanning the documents. One page caught his eye, a letter written by Rebecca but never sent. It was addressed to Ryder Thorne. The name sent a jolt through Maverick's chest. Ryder Thorne had been a whistleblower, a former intelligence agent who vanished after exposing corruption within a federal child protection task force. Maverick remembered the name from old news clippings. Thorne had been accused of fabricating stories, manipulating files. But what if he hadn't? What if Rebecca had gone to him and vanished with him? Phoenix approached slowly, holding a drawing. "This is him," she said softly. Maverick looked down. The image showed a man with dark hair and a long coat, standing beside Rebecca, with a little girl between them. "I used to call him Uncle Ryder," she added. Maverick stared at the drawing, stunned. That meant Ryder Thorne wasn't just real. He'd been part of Phoenix's life. And if he was alive, he might be the only one who knew what truly happened to Rebecca. As if summoned by the thought, Maverick's phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. He answered cautiously. A calm voice came through the line. "You're looking for answers. Meet me at Knox Ravage Park. Midnight. Come alone." The call ended before he could respond. Maverick's pulse pounded in his ears. Knox Ravage Park was abandoned. No cameras. No patrols. The perfect place for a trap or a confession. He turned to Phoenix, who was watching him with the quiet, knowing expression she always wore when something changed. "Are we going to find her?" she asked. He knelt down, met her eyes and said, "We're closer than ever." But inside, he wasn't sure if what they were about to find would bring peace or more pain. Either way, there was no turning back now. The cold wind cut through Knox Ravage Park like a knife as Maverick approached the abandoned gazebo at midnight. The moon hung low, casting pale shadows over the cracked pavement. His heart pounded with every step, Phoenix clutching Draco's leash tightly beside him. He could feel the weight of years pressing down. The unanswered questions, the fears, the hope. Tonight, everything would change. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall, lean, and cautious. Maverick's breath caught when he recognized him. Ryder Thorne. The man's eyes, tired but sharp, met Maverick's with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "I thought I'd lost you all," Ryder said quietly. "Rebecca asked me to protect Phoenix, to keep her hidden until it was safe." His voice cracked with the weight of secrets long kept. Ryder explained how Rebecca had uncovered corruption within the very system meant to protect children like Phoenix. She had gone into hiding, sacrificing her own freedom to keep her daughter safe. But the shadows were closing in, and it was time for the truth to come into the light. Maverick listened, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, each revelation both a relief and a fresh wound. Phoenix stepped forward, her small voice steady. "I'm not afraid anymore." Draco nudged her hand as if to remind her how far they had come. Maverick smiled, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. In that moment, the loneliness that had haunted him for years began to lift. They were no longer alone. Together, they made a pact, to face whatever came next, as a family. The past would not define them. The scars they bore were marks of survival, strength, and hope. As dawn began to break, Maverick looked at Phoenix and Ryder and whispered, "This is just the beginning." The first rays of sunlight spilled across the park, chasing away the darkness. And for the first time in a long time, Maverick felt peace.